peek behind the curtain of the Softly Training Lab with the Softly Performance Podcast. The pinnacle of human performance is out there, and we intend to find it.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Softly Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Giovanni. With me, I got Matt and Brent. Today, we're talking about something that I think, well, for a lot of the Poindexters out there in academia, they fail to remember that we've got to translate it to the real world. We're talking about something called self-determination theory. In short, if that's a $10 term, the $1 term is motivation. We're talking about why we do what we do. Inside of that, there are two things that I want you to remember. And then once we open up this conversation, just know that, yeah, there's a little short lecture here, but then we'll open it up for further discussion. Two things that we need to know. Firstly, we can be externally driven or internally driven. We can have extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivation. External means that the motivation is coming from outside. So this means if you're motivated by money, that's an external factor. If you're motivated by someone yelling at you, that's an external factor. Internal. Well, this is important to me. This is part of who I am. I'm an operator. I'm a firefighter. You can see how there's a lot more, let's say, deep-seated psychological reasons for doing something versus I'm just doing this to get paid. I'm doing this because of my buddies to my left and my right. So there is a sliding scale that we'll talk about. There's different, let's think of this as a spectrum. It's not like these are hard stages, but people who are extrinsically driven or externally driven are generally driven by punishment or reward. So think of yourself, well, at least for myself, I think, what's that, Brent?
Punishment is the reward.
Or yeah, if you're a Marine, if you're a Marine, you'll understand that. Yes. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of like basic. I'm thinking when you're a junior Marine, you're just getting your shit pushed in constantly. It doesn't matter if you do something right or wrong. You're just getting fucking punished. There's a reason. There's a psychological reason for that. And this is why I wanted to talk about it, because in the academic settings, they talk about here is what motivation is, but they don't really talk about the application specifically, in my experience, to the military first responder communities. And then secondly, there's a lot of people, at least in my experience with the Marine Corps, they just want to play fuck games. They just want to fuck with you because that's what they think you need, but they don't understand why that's even a thing. It drives me fucking crazy. I have many memories of field days on Thursday nights where I would clean grout out with a screwdriver because I knew this fuckwit would come in and just be like, "You couldn't clean your room." Like, no, I fucking did. So anyway, those people need to understand why we apply external motivation, whether it's punishment or reward. If you don't understand that, then you can take someone who's very internally driven for the right reasons and slide them down to be more externally driven, which is a bad thing. You don't want to make someone who's high level and turn them into a recruit. Or what can also happen is you take someone high level, you try to apply a strategy that works for a recruit, well, you can see how they might be pissed off. We've all been in that situation where maybe you're an NC, like in my experience, someone tries to come in and treat you like a boot and they ain't going to fucking work. So anyway, that's external.
Matt's life at Softly. Does I just yell at him until he writes the programs?
Yes. Thankfully, I'm not in that conversation. I see you do it, though. It makes me very uncomfortable sometimes.
Just screaming at him.
He was doing it.
Throwing shit.
Yeah, he was doing it just before we started recording. It was really fucking weird. I don't know why he does that.
Just crying.
Get some, sick satisfaction out of that. Anyway, so that's on the left side of the scale. Someone driven by punishment and reward. If we slide over towards intrinsic or internally driven results, you can see now how we can facilitate group cohesion. So in my mind, this is where you have team events going on, or your squad is being punished, or your group is being punished. And now you're trying to keep each other accountable instead of just worrying about yourself. So where this gets fun from a strength and conditioning aspect is we can generate or design programs that facilitate group involvement. So one of my favorite ESD protocols or conditioning protocols is you go, I go, where you're on a VersaClimber and you're just fucking crushing it for, let's say, 100 to 200 feet. And I'm stuck doing a double rack carry with heavy kettlebells, 24 kilos in each hand. And I cannot let go until you're done. And then we just keep switching off. So you can see how if you're on the VersaClimber, you're going to push way harder because you know I'm in the fucking pain cave, so to speak, and vice versa. So now you're beholden to the group. Let us think on what that looks like in the military first responder communities when you're training with each other from like, let's say, a partner or a small unit, like 3 to 4 fire team size element. As we tend to drift over again to the intrinsic side, now we are going to see certain behaviors as valuable. So I know someone who is just about to, well, I know one guy who's just about to go to Ranger School. I think he might be in it right now. He's just about to go. It's October. And I know another individual who's waiting for his boat space to go
Or a
and
bastard.
try. Yes. Yeah. Both of them. He's trying to be a Navy SEAL. So for these individuals, for that latter candidate who wants to go be a Navy SEAL, he's going to see certain behaviors as valuable. Certain actions that he takes are going to be more in line with what a Navy SEAL might do in his head. So he's going to do those things. Oh, so Navy SEALs tend to swim. They tend to be very comfortable in the water. I'm going to go do that. Versus when I was working in Romania, so many of the candidates entered into the special operations pipeline because of the paycheck. We can see. Yeah, well, I mean, now that's a whole nother conversation, but a big reason for that was because if you think about Romania, especially from a government historical standpoint, they only left communism in the 1980s. And I want to say 75% of the country lives below the poverty line in rural parts of Romania, and the literacy rate is under 50%. It's something wild. It's like under 50%. So for them, it's not so much about making a better qualitative life for themselves from a value standpoint. It's more about fucking putting food on my plate. Like a lot of the reasons. So there's a conversation around external versus internal motivation. They signed up not because they wanted to serve their country or et cetera ad nauseum.
Well,
no, why did they sign?
So,
well, they kind of do, and they kind of do.
Yeah,
being very reductive.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that happens often in science or in observation or in psychology, right? Is a lot of times, especially when somebody's very early to the game and studying human behaviors, is they try to put people in these buckets, right? And so if we think about it politically, you're like, okay, cool. You're like a Democrat that likes guns. You know, people try to draw these parallels to help them understand. But what I think is very important is those motivations. When you're talking, like we just went through a massive breadth of motivations. They are much more like a Venn diagram than
thank you for saying that.
If then statement. And I think it's important to note that different things happen at different times, right? And so a great example that I'll give to myself is I have a fuck it good enough mentality for some things, which is super valuable as an entrepreneur, right? 80% solution today beats 100% solution in 5 years, 10 out of 10 times. I will probably exaggerate that pretty well when I am doing things solo versus when I have a roommate or a teammate and I'm like, nope, like shit's got to be squared away, right? And so I think that those motivations, internal and external, and behaviors can ebb and flow with things like social capital and having your teammates around you, even if that's not your overall motivation. So I think it's important to note that this is more of a Venn diagram than an if-then state.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. Yes, that is partly, so academia will often put everything in nice blocks that are easy to understand. We always have to stress, especially in later stages of your competence, that it's never that simple. Never. So, because you have to consider, and I'm going to get to this in a sec. So anyway, let's say last stage, and I'm using that word loosely, last, okay? Because again, it's a Venn diagram, it's a spectrum. Now you see yourself as a Navy SEAL, so to speak. Now you see yourself as a firefighter. Your actions are already in line. You don't have to think about it. You just are. So with those Romanians, eventually what ended up happening across that 3-month pipeline is we were left with operators. Well, here's a great example
of what patriotic.
Yes. So here's the cool. So I guess I want to bring this up because, again, in the academic setting, in my experience, they just talk about it as it's this thing that, yeah, you want to understand it, but you can't generate conditions to facilitate sliding people one way or the other. You absolutely can. I just talked about it. But for those guys, the Romanians, I'm really proud of those guys because I want to say we had a 50% washout rate at the end, which for them was pretty good. The people that, let me put it to you this way. I have 2 photos. One from early on in their training. We had a hump or forced march, call it, ruck, whatever you want to call it. And they were fucking, if you've ever done that before, you know what, especially in formation, you know what the accordion is. It fucking sucks. So everybody had this really wide spread where they're getting really tight and really wide. You had some people having to run and then slow down, and then some people couldn't fucking keep up. They looked like dog shit. Now consider where they were along that internal scale. We had some people just fucking walking because they wanted to, not because like they couldn't keep up. It's just like, no, we're just, why? Because you got to think again, culturally, what's driving them? So I bring up that external motivation piece. They required a little bit more external. But at the end of this training pipeline, I have a picture of them carrying each other. There's a guy who fell out, and then he's got 2 guys helping him. And not only that, the fucking grouping is tight. These guys are fucking tight. So it was really cool to see, because at the beginning, so many of them didn't know like what physical training was, why they were doing it. But at the end, this is after I left, and this is why this is important. After I left, one of the coaches that stayed was in a town called Targamuresh, and he saw 2 of these Romanian operators training on their own. They were rucking on their own in town. He was not telling them to do this. They did it on their own. So think about where those people are along that motivation scale. And I would say, and I would agree with you, Brent, the people who were left were generally more patriotic. Now, I want to bring this up. It's not like it is the Venn diagram you brought up. It is a filter, but it's a soft paper filter. So it's not like we were looking to identify people, yes, but we're also trying to slide people over. So you can fuck with people. You can make it to where people slide up and down this scale. So so Brent, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this is super interesting. And I've been a selection instructor twice, which was a phenomenal learning experience for me, both at MARSOC selection as a short timer guest selection instructor. Not to say they were like, Brent Phillips is amazing, we have to get him. You get flagged as a team or individual, or you got to provide bodies to selection. And so that's considered a guest instructor. There's guys whose full-time job is running selection. And then there's typically, at least in our selection, I think most of the others, there's a recurring cadre of contractors as well. And frankly, the contractors are what keep, the contractors will be there, for years. Probably, I should reach out to some of them. I bet some of them have been there 10 plus years. So when I say guest instructor, I don't mean they brought me in for my keen eye for students or anything. Just I got to show up and play the game for a little bit. One of the things that's interesting is you're assessing candidates on a spectrum. Not saying they're on the spectrum, maybe, but you're looking for a spectrum of qualities. Number one is he trainable, right? And so that's the first quality that we're going to give you we're going to assess for, because we're going to give you tasks that you don't know how to do, and we want to see if you can complete them. Now, a lot of us cheated because we went through multiple selection processes through our careers, right? So I knew how to tie knots when I showed up at MARSOC. So the knot board was in the corner, and you see a lot of guys that were trying to tie knots. When I went through selection, I'm like, I don't give a shit. I already did this when I was at Recon. So there's a little bit of that, but first, you got to decide, is somebody trainable? Can I teach them how to do land navigation in special operations? And I would wager in most employment situations, the job you come in that they need you to do, if you stay there for an extended period of time, is not going to be the job that you're doing at the end of your career, right? Matt, I don't know what the hell you came into Softly to do. Probably do another
George's little helper.
Yeah. So in business, it's the same. In life, it's the same. Now, if you're the guy that's working the assembly line, that's awesome. That's great. But if your job is hey, you put this bolt in this hole, that's not going to change a whole lot if you stay in that role, right? You may promote out of it, et cetera. But anyway, aside from that, most business, most life, you're not going to necessarily do the same thing over and over and over again, which is why we want to see, can you be trained and can you learn? Humility factors into that, right? So in order to be a good learner, you have to be humble enough to take a step back and go, I don't know shit about fuck. This guy's going to teach me shit about fuck. So therefore, I'm going to shut up and listen, right? And so I would say that's one of the more important things. One of the other big pieces that is more relevant to this conversation is the motivation. And so you want to hear hey, why are you here? You get asked that in your psyche vals at good selection process. Now, if you go and you're hey, I'm using this as a stepping stone to go to Delta Force next, you're not getting selected, if you tell them that, right? And I can tell you that because I know guys who said that, which is the dumbest thing I can imagine telling a psych, that the unit that he's working for, that is a pinnacle unit, it's a stepping stone to you to go on to another one. Wild thought. Anyway, so motivations are incredibly important. Motivations, as we talked about, were a Venn diagram. They also can change as somebody progresses, regresses, or life circumstances change, like we're talking about, right? So these guys, and I like to talk about my own experience with that, because firsthand, I was not a super patriotic guy coming into the Marines. That shit looked cool and I wanted to do it. And the patriotism came later, right? So I don't think that's an uncommon story, right? We talk a lot about the guys that were kind of the misfits, because in special operations, you have a pretty large number of guys who were not great scholastic athletes, or that wasn't at least how they self-identified, that do come into the service and they end up having like an insane love for their country. Part of that is that you're serving your country. Part of that is you get to see the shithole that is the rest of the world. You're like, man, America's pretty great, actually. But those motivations do change, right? And so they can change so drastically from like, hey, I want to go in the Marine Corps because that looks like a great adventure doing crazy shit. And that's appealing to me as an 18, 19-year-old kid, to I want to go be a support guy at an aviation wing, because I realized that the implications of an aviation wing are massive on a strategic level. And that's a huge influence that I can have for the nation. And so you're going to leave this cool infantry job and go and be in like an aviation. My point is, you could change your motivations by becoming super patriotic to decide I am actually a better fit. I have more impact for my nation by doing this other thing. So, and G, to your point, I think it's Romania, right? I'm a little jealous that you get to go to Romania. That's like on my bucket list to go ride dirt bikes in Romania. But anyway.
Well, I can see that.
Yeah, one of the biggest, we're going to totally go off on a tangent if you let me, so don't let me. But one of the biggest dirt bike races in the world is called Romaniacs, and it's in Romania. And it's like insanely gnarly, like riding up cliffs and shit. Like I had
no idea.
Yeah. But anyway, so those Romanians, they came in the door and they're like, yeah, I want a paycheck. Special operations guys get an extra, whatever, $28 a month in hazard duty pay or whatever they were getting. That's where I'm going because it puts food on the table. That then changed. And these guys were like, oh man. So I think what's super interesting from not a selecting standpoint, but a leadership standpoint, is you can change people's motivations, right? You can change what motivates them to show up and to work. That is good and bad, right? So that can go back to that old adage of like, hey, we have to educate our people. And then the question is like, well, what if we educate them and they leave? And you're like, what if we don't educate them and they stay, right? That's always the issue, right? And so from a leadership standpoint, the question is, how do you keep people like rowing the boat in the same direction? But Matt's like, hey, I want to be the guy yelling at everybody and not rowing anymore. How does that work? And in the military, it's a bit easier because people can be more like cannon fodder, where like, I know if you're in special operations, you think that you are the grand poobah that ever happened to that unit. I promise you, I was in units where I thought I did have a good reputation, like was a high performer. That fucking unit kept performing when I left, right? Like there's 100 guys in line to take your seat every single time. So you're not going to be the grand poobah forever, right? And you're probably not actually the grand poobah when you're there. But if you want to move on and that motivation changes, how do you do that in a way that actually works for the unit and for the individual, right? So if you peel it out of military special operations where there's 1,000 guys literally in a selection pipeline, whether that's packets dropped or like in selection physically, how do you keep the motivation going? And to me, that's a much more interesting conversation, right? So I heard a friend of mine say, I don't give a shit about the leadership principles of a Navy SEAL. I don't. The guy who runs like the meth addicted National Guard unit that like had to go to Iraq together for a year, that's the guy I want to talk to. Like, how'd you get this band of 18-year-old to 20-year-olds that have other things going on that are not uber high performers, not in a highly selective unit where they're proving themselves every day? How'd you get those guys to go like fight a war? And
can you tell us more about that? Because that's the first I'm hearing of it.
Of what? This theory?
This meth addicted. Tell me more about meth. What is that?
I think that was his bad analogy of like you saw him in Iraq, I'm sure, guys who showed up that were in a reserve unit, and you're like, those guys are in the military? That dude looks 90. Yes. Yeah, that guy's 90 years old. That guy can't see his feet. And somebody had to band those guys together and get them to fight, right? So his thought was, that's real leadership, and I want to know how that took place, right? And so that's what we're talking about doing, is how do you... I don't know, as a coach and somebody who likes to make things and build shit, that's what's super interesting to me, is when you can take a group of individuals that are like this motley band of misfits and then get them to rally, show them what they're capable of. A lot of what I have seen is that people, to include myself, don't realize what they are physically capable of until somebody else does something that they're like, that's a thing. For me, the one that sticks out is 20 pull-ups. I had never done 20 pull-ups in my life, and I got to recon school, and I was like towards the back of the line, last name Phillips, and they're alphabetically, and I swear, it's probably built up in my mind, but I swear every dude did 20 pull-ups, which was the max back then, in front of me in line. I'd never done 20 pull-ups in my life. I was like,
No,
oh,
I was there.
shit.
That happened.
Everybody does 20 pull-ups here? Like, what the fuck? Like, I thought, whatever I did, 16 or 15, like it was in the teens, right? Like high mid-teens. I thought that was like killing it. And then literally every dude in front of me jumps up and does 20. I'm like, oh, we do 20. Okay, I'll like get on the bar and do 20 pull-ups. My point is, that is like showing people, hey, this is what is actually the standard and what you're capable of. That can get people to band together, right? And showing them what they're capable of as a unit and needing to lean on each other to get through those difficult times. That's one of the reasons that many of these pipelines are built this way, right? You're trying to get people basically to their breaking point together so that like, while this guy is at his breaking point, that guy is not. And that guy carries him through, and you rinse and repeat. And then preferably this guy that is at his breaking point comes through, no longer at his breaking point, and helps that guy who's now at his breaking point. And so a lot of these things that we're talking about, like getting your dick smashed in as a E2, E3 Marine, getting yelled at every day, blah, 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 blah. A lot of these things are by design, right? You're trying to break down the individual to build the team. Part of that often goes unspoken, not at MARSOC, but at a lot of places it goes unspoken, is like the strength of that team is the group of the individuals, right? So I'm on a bit of a tangent at this point, and I got to walk us back. But I think what I want to talk about is the motivations are more of a Venn diagram. They do ebb and flow and change, and we need to be able to assess and self-assess what our actual motivations are. And then the last part is you can change those for the better or for the worse, right? So I'll get off my soapbox, but if somebody else wants to talk about how you've seen them change for the worse, that would be phenomenal.
Well, Matt, I want you to get your thoughts in. Two things came to mind when you were talking, Brent, specifically towards that latter portion. Firstly, like helping each other out. That's going back to helping the group versus helping yourself. And you can see how that's sliding towards building a better team. And then the second thing was the difference between a process-focused approach versus outcome-focused approach, meaning what is the end versus are we focusing on just being a better human, so to speak? And that end will come if I focus on the process. That's more qualitative versus, oh, I just got to get that badge, that certificate, whatever. That's more cheap. That makes sense. It's not got to be fucking, I'm not saying you got to be crazy, but you can see how someone who's obsessed, generally everything else will kind of help see that outcome, that positive outcome. Matt?
Yeah, I guess just kind of echoing you guys really, and also sort of pointing out that certainly from a coaching perspective, I wouldn't necessarily say that one is any better than the other. I wouldn't necessarily that external is any better or worse than internal motivation. They're just different. And this sounds super cliche and cheesy, but I think it's like Brent was talking about getting the best out of that individual. It's about kind of understanding what makes that person tick or that team or that unit tick and knowing, okay, well, these are the constraints. This is the time I've got with them. These are the objectives we've got to hit. How do I kind of guide them towards that end state? And it might be that maybe your timeline in Romania, G, if that was compressed or you didn't have the budget, like for training and stuff, it might be that actually more an externally motivated model of coaching is fine. Like that gets you to the objective. I think we're obviously like you said before, from academia and particularly with social media, everything is very reductionist now. And we're classically told that external is bad, internal is good. You have to be kind of driven Rocky style. But I would argue it depends what you need. It depends what you want. I think internal is going to be really important long term if you can kind of shift towards that. But if the goal is to get this team, get this group to objective A in the shortest amount of time, that might not be the most effective way of doing it.
I suppose it depends on what your end goals are. And for us, we knew that we weren't always going to be there. So yes, I would say the first half of that program was very externally driven. We also had outcome markers that we knew we needed to hit, like a certain speed for the ruck because of the distance that they had to travel, certain amount of push-ups, etc. With those guys, we eventually, latter half, took a big step back. And we had to be comfortable with letting ourselves do that because, again, it's like the guy who creates a really sexy looking practice or drill on Instagram and it looks fucking great. And then when you see the team perform, they fucking choke. Like, and Brent, you mentioned this earlier. Essentially, what you're saying is a good plan executed today is better than the perfect plan 2 weeks from now. We knew that we wanted them good. We didn't want them perfect. Perfect doesn't fucking exist. So that last half, we took a big step back and they were coaching each other. And how about that, huh? Like you're running your own selection, so to speak. That's pretty fucking dope. So we did that across 3 months. And I am super happy with, and I know the team is too, Josh Fletcher. I'm going to tell him that we were talking about it today. And Trey Coons was the PT. But super happy with how things ended up. And I just really want to stress this. Like if I said you had to go run 800 meters, or if I said you had to go run a marathon, to drive home this concept of like, why are you doing it? Hey, you have to run a marathon in 3 hours. Hey, you just have to run a marathon, just whatever pace you want. So think about somebody who's just getting started. That latter, let's say prescription, run a marathon, whatever time you want. We don't know if they're going to go fucking whole hog and fucking send it and do a great time. They're going to go at the pace that they want. Whereas if you created this environment that facilitates, let's say, process-oriented approach, and focus on qualitative, and then you tell that person, hey, go run this marathon. You don't have to say, go run it in 3 hours. They'll just do it, hopefully.
This idea of going back to what you were saying about the coach being maybe more of a facilitator rather than the drill sergeant type approach. So if we think, obviously, like Brent was saying, pipelines are in place because of the outcome that is deemed appropriate for whatever that pipeline is. But if we think of what we want long-term out of this individual, whether we're talking law enforcement, military or fire or whatever, generally you want them to be kind of pretty self-aware, you want them to be able to problem solve, and you want them to think outside the box. So that's kind of where I think we have an awesome opportunity within physical training to start instilling some of those qualities. And I think a lot of that comes from having the confidence as a coach to like set constraints, like set kind of boundaries or parameters to a drill or a game or an exercise, and then kind of step back a little bit and allow either the individual or the group of individuals to have some creative license on how they get to that endpoint. So it's almost taking an outcome-based approach rather than a process-based approach. We're not saying, okay, you have to pick this up and then you have to move that over there, then you have to pick that up and move. We're saying, okay, this needs to happen, figure it out. And obviously, again, it depends what you're trying to get out of things. That's probably going to take more planning. It's probably going to take a little bit more time because you have to allow them to like fuck it up. And that's where the beauty of it is. They're making errors and learning. But allowing opportunities for things like that, I think are really important for the motivational side of things, because it's clearly on them, but also that transfer back to real life.
Yeah. So
if you're going to say this too, it reminds me of those, let's say, exercises where, when I say exercise, I'm talking about from a time standpoint, not a specific movement, where it's unknown distance, unknown completion time. And I feel like if you told me, Giovanni, we're going to do this, you're done when you're done today, my mindset would be very different than if I was a boot. If I was a boot, I would be thinking, when are we going to be done? And then today I'd be like, the whole point is to go for an unknown. I can handle that. I think it's interesting. But Brent, say what you're going to say.
Yeah, so there's one, I had two thoughts that popped into my head. One was, like we often talk about, a constraints-led approach, or however we want to phrase that. Time is typically what we're building training plans on in the military, right? So if you're doing a 6-month deployment and your goal is to recruit, train, and work with a friendly militia, partner force, whatever it is, which is very typical in SOF or foreign nation, like you're going to build a SOF unit in this foreign nation, you've got a finite amount of time. So when you build your training plan, you're like, okay, I show up January 1, I leave, June 1st or 30th. How many days are in June? I leave in June, right? And so you're going to now backwards plan and you're going to go, okay, they've got to be operational 4 months in. So, by, what was that, April, I've got to have them like actually going on operations. So that means that we need to be conducting like final rehearsals, certification exercise type of thing 30 days prior to that, right? And like now you're doing your backwards planning and you build in like, so what are you going to do? Right out of the gate, you're going to show up, you're going to give them a PT test. Where are you? You're going to do the PT test with them because guess what? American SOF, we're fucking superheroes to the rest of the world. I don't know if anybody got the memo, but like, we're in really good shape compared to the rest of the world's military. So you're going to do this PT test with them, right? You're going to show them your 20 pull-ups, 22, whatever the fuck it is now, your 100 push-ups, blah, 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 blah. They're like, man, these guys are superheroes. I'm a piece of shit. And then you're going to build them up from that to them totally leading themselves, right? When they're getting ready for that deployment or that actual mission, whatever it is, 4 months later, 6 months later, et cetera, you're going to have them at a position where they're like, no, I am the guy, right? And so what you have to do is you have to be very realistic when you do your initial assessment. So you may walk onto that deployment like, hey man, day one, they're going to run a PT test. Day 120, they're going to be doing full mission profiles, just like SEAL Team 6. And when you show up, you're like, our top score on sit-ups today was 14. Change of plans, right? Like, we're starting with guys who literally can't tie their boots. So you change that, but it's often based on the constraint of time. And so that made me think very much of the difference between like what I've found is in the military and people who come from that. We're really good at figuring out how to have a successful deployment, a successful school phase, a successful team workup, whatever it is. We've like blocked out our little calendar, and life doesn't work that way, right? Like you can't, now so much of all three of our lives revolves around kids and family, and you can't go to your kids and be like, hey, check it out. For 6 months, I'm going to be a great dad. Then the next 6, good fucking luck, right? So what you end up with, and you're not doing these phase gates counselings with your kids of like, I mean, you kind of are.
Why can't I?
You kind of are with like report cards, and like we got report cards yesterday. So you're kind of are giving them these little like phase gates. But what comes to my mind is, gosh dang it, the Infinite Game, I believe. I looked it up real quick. So it's a book called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And so what life actually is, and most of our leadership is an infinite game, right? Like you're not doing a 6-month, you may have a 6-month check-in, but like how long have you worked for Softly? A lot longer than 6 months, right? Like quite a while now. Oh yeah. When you talk about like, how do you continue to keep motivations, in a way that work for the individual and the team, it's more of an infinite game than like a 6-month game, right? So, like, you saw when you tapped in with the Romanians, you're like, I'm here for 3 months. That's a long time. And it is to be in Romania for 3 months when like you live in the States. But for those Romanians, that 3 months is like a blip on the radar, right? That's like hey, remember that time those guys came and like, trained with us, right? So my point is this: we can have our phase gates, but really when we start to look at things as like this infinite game, and how do we that's kind of more of the Softly goal, is we're in this infinite game of human performance where we may get a guy who's like 22 that comes into Softly because he's like, yeah, I'm going to go to selection and be a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL or whatever it's going to be. And he may not stop that need to be very fit for 20 or 30 or like in extreme cases 40 years, right? So he may stick around in that profession of arms 40 years and not hang up the gun till he's in his 60s. That's pretty wild. That's more of the infinite game, right? And so when we do talk about like Matt, you're like intrinsic versus internal versus external motivation doesn't really matter. Like one's not better than the other. I would say maybe that depends, right? So from a coach's perspective, I think you're 100% right. It doesn't really matter. From a employment perspective, whether that's like business or in a military unit, I think you have to have intrinsic motivation to be a great operator, employee, parent, etc. I think you have to have that internal motivation structure to actually rise to greatness. As a coach, you could work around it, right? Like I've had the guys in units, whether that was like, I've had guys that were rock stars that were in a foreign military unit, and I've had guys that were absolute dog shit that were in a U.S. military unit, right? And so figuring out what their motivations and how you work around that, not to say one's necessarily not better than the other, because I always think that if somebody's very internally motivated, I guess that could be a double-edged sword if they don't buy into your bullshit and you're trying to get them to do something. But you do need that, in my experience, to be a high performer. Go G.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but as you were approaching that ladder, like, why are they doing this? It reminded me, there's 2 matrices that I always like to keep in mind when I'm working with people. And one is the skill will matrix, and the other one is the smart and lazy matrix. The smart and lazy one comes from I think a World War I era German general. But the one I want to talk to that's more relevant is the skill will matrix, which I think comes from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I could be wrong though. Maybe I'm thinking of his timing quadrant. Anyway, along one vector, you have low skill and low and high skill. Along the other vector, you have low will and high will. So will is the why. Why are you doing this? So generally speaking, for your organization or your team, why is that person there? Are they there for themselves, or are they there to help make everyone else better? Right. So I'm thinking of my time at Exos. There was a coach that was let go prior to my being let go, where that person was definitely, let's say, self-aggrandizing themselves. They were there to elevate themselves. So you can see, I can't believe I'm going to use this word, discongruity when working with the other team, because this person didn't want to help anybody else out. So high will for them, not high will for the team. High skill, that's why they were there. But you can see how we want to be conscious of, well, what's motivating me? What's motivating the people around me? So when you bring up leadership, Brent, with the National Guard, and let's think about that. Like, it's not like they're living together all the fucking time. 1 weekend a month, on average. So let's consider what is driving these people, the why. I guess there's Simon Sinek start with why.
Yeah, I've read too many of his books, unfortunately, but him and Malcolm Gladwell, I feel like we're on a tear there like 10 years ago. But, the motivation, like to Matt's...
That reminds me. Can I bring this up? I almost forgot. Okay. I don't think Malcolm Gladwell wrote this book. Was it a Flashpoint or something like that? Or maybe it was The Moment. But anyway, scientifically speaking, from a psychological standpoint, we tend to remember 2 things. Now, I want people to remember and apply this to your own training pipelines. It can happen from a micro standpoint, like watching a movie. It can happen across multiple weeks or days. So I like to apply this to both. But generally speaking, we remember peaks of experiences, the highs, and we remember the end. So for me as a coach, if you are a dipshit and you want to just do bodybuilding all the time, and I know you need speed and power, okay, fine. We're going to generate a program where the peak is bodybuilding, the end is bodybuilding, but I've done everything else to facilitate what I wanted to do. But you're going to remember those 2 things. So think about that as applied to what we've been talking about with motivation. Can I do 90% of what I want to do, but make you feel like you got what you wanted? So
was the book you're thinking about The Tipping Point? I pulled up The Tipping Point. Go, Matt.
Tipping Point.
Yeah,
okay.
Just while you guys are kind of looking in. If generally when we have software users reach out to us and they're looking at I know we keep kind of banging on about using a soft pipeline or something like that, but let's just keep running with that as an example. We kind of talk about like the training that we're going to do, like the physical side of things. This is how we're going to back plan. We've got X amount of time to get you ready for selection. This is how we're going to build up. We kind of touch on like nutrition and recovery side of things. One of the other things we always talk about as well is those kind of psychological skills. So like early doors before you get to selection, start playing around with like goal setting, how good you are at like up-regulating and down-regulating arousal or intensity, however you want to call it, and like visualization, those kind of things. But one of the other big things we always try and push, especially if we have a lot of time, is like just over these next kind of few days, few weeks, start thinking about your whys. Because if you can figure them out now and like embed them into the training that you're doing, when you start like really getting questioned, when you start getting really challenged and tested, you can kind of fall back on like a solid platform of, oh yeah, this is why I'm doing it. So that's something I found has been quite useful for working with guys.
I mean, that's for any situation, right? Like that's super important. That's why that's the real stuff that I think people can take away from this.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going a few layers deep with it. So try and see if you can ask yourself why maybe 7 or 8 times. And what I mean by that is like, okay, so why am I doing this? Because it's a cool job. Okay, so why is it a cool job? Oh, because I get to jump out of planes and blow shit up. Okay, well, why does that appeal to me? And kind of understanding those real like base motivation behind what it is you're doing. Sometimes I should probably caveat and warn, sometimes that's not the most positive or pleasant experience at the time, like trying to figure that stuff out. It's not necessarily like a gold shining unicorn of like bright light. Some of those things can be quite dark, and that's okay, I think. But understanding them, like understanding your thought processes, I think are really kind of useful. And I was going to throw that then back to you guys. My career has been around like getting people ready for that stuff and supporting people like yourselves. I was going to throw it back to you guys who actually did those roles. Does that have any resonance from your personal experience or from people you've worked with?
I think in hindsight it does. I think being in this, like, now I have a few years on, and it's like, okay, now I know why I made it as far as I did. It wasn't because I was looking for a paycheck. I also think of it drives to you when you were talking about that. It reminds me of my wife, the company that she works for. She's in the automotive finance sector, and as part of her job for training, she had to go work at a dealership, a car dealership. And anybody who's worked in a car dealership knows, like, it's very rare to find a nice, like, cool culture, and everybody's, like, helping each other out. In that space, you're very much driven by numbers. So anybody who's worked in that space knows what a Saturday morning meeting is. And in my opinion, it's like, if you're in the military, it's that bullshit formation where they fucking try to rah you up. It's like the force motivation thing. It's completely cheap and it doesn't fucking work. It lands flat every time. I'm saying this as like an observer. Anyway,
Andy
knowing
Elliott
your
would disagree.
why. Yeah. Oh, is that the guy, the bald dude?
Bald dude that, like,
Yeah, fucking hate that.
If you don't have a six pack, you can't work for me.
Oh yeah. But anyway, I guess knowing what I know now, like, it helps me understand, don't put myself in a situation where my why doesn't line up with what I'm going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Because if I am, but my wife, she had to work really fucking hard to stay sane because she's not that type. And it's a good thing. She wasn't that type of person. She doesn't do well in that kind. I'm not saying she didn't do well. She did do well, but she's just not.
That's not her.
It's not.
That's
Thank
not her
you.
why.
It's not her. So I guess I bring this up as a call to action for those of you listening. If you're not doing well, is it the environment that you're in and it's not lining up with your why or your reason for doing things? So hopefully, Matt, that answered your question from my perspective. I'm curious on Brent's.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's also, you can find the good in anything, right? Like, if you've never written or never read books written by Holocaust survivors, you should, because you'll find, like, talk about some shit of, like, literally being in the worst conditions imaginable and, like, how good the sun felt on their face, like, walking outside one day, right? And, like, so you start to think, like, back to, okay, well, if this isn't what I want to be doing, is it answering the why, right? So for me, I think about this a shitload because, I'll be honest, guys, I don't love a job that has me stateside, not deploying. Like, that is the job that I love and loved. That's not what I do anymore, right? And so the why, so the why is like, well, you know what? Like, I get to pick my kids up from school, so that's the why, right? And so what I would say is, like, yeah, if you're in those circumstances, Caroline had to do this 1,000%. Why am I here? I'm doing this for, like, whatever she did it for, a month, a year, to get to that next thing, right? I think what's really important is figuring out the why and realizing what makes you happy, and then trying to figure out how to make the rest work, right? So, like, Matt and UG are not strength and conditioning coaches because that's the best way to make a butt fuck ton of money. Like, I don't own a human performance company in a tiny, tiny microcosm industry because it's the best way to get filthy rich. Otherwise, I would just say I had an AI company and take investor money and sail off into the sunset, right? But you do it because there's other things that motivate you. And so what I would say is, if you can make the constraints under which you live, like, I have to eat and pay a rent or mortgage or car payment, and then make the rest work, finding the good in whatever it is, whether that's, you're on a deployment you didn't want to be on, the list goes on and on. And I think that can be equally important, is anchoring the shit task in the why, which is often what we're talking about with, like, selection process. A lot of that is considered like a shit task. Like, I have to walk through the woods by myself for, 20, 30, 40, 50 kilometers today. For most people sucks. For a lot of us, it's like, oh man, I have no responsibilities and I'm not allowed to have a cell phone. This is sick, right? Can I sign up for selection now? What's interesting to me is I don't necessarily know that the success criteria are rooted in the motivation. And so I think it may be in your ability to navigate the present based on those motivations. So I think the motivations what gets you there. And then there's a post that comes to mind. It was like one of the mental health pages posted, like, every special operations guys had, like, this kind of upbringing or something, no matter their socioeconomic status. And I made a quip of, like, who knew an ability to dissociate would, like, help me get through these selection processes. But I've often thought of that of like the motivation got you there, but like whether that's discipline or an ability to just be like, well, I guess it's raining and we're walking today. Like whatever that those other abilities can be just as important to like getting you through, because there's like gaps in this motivation, right? And so that's where simplistic means, or simplistic way to describe it is motivation fails, discipline does not, right? So as you're walking from point A to point B and it's shitty and rainy and cold and it's 40 degrees and you only have one MRE to eat a day, and you're not sleeping well because you're in a squad bay and all your gear is wet, or you're living outside, like whatever the suck circumstances are, in my experience, everybody's motivation falls apart when in that situation. And that's why every selection is over a long enough time that you're going to run into that. And when that falls off, discipline, or in my sense, lack of discipline, but a total ability to dissociate from the current situation, is what takes you through, right? And so if we have motivation as these blocks, that's the overarching rhyme and reason and why. And typically people's actions will fall into that motivation, which is why as an employer in a soft unit, in other things, you're always assessing like, what are people's motivations, right? So like if Matt told me, I don't give a shit about making anybody else stronger or healthier, I just want to get paid a ton of money, I'm like, I don't know that we can help Matt, because we're in strength and conditioning and it's not a super lucrative space. Same thing for me. If I was like, I don't care about this, I just want to make a ton of money, like it doesn't work, right? And so you always have to be assessing people's motivations, and the why, I think, is what gets you through those gaps in motivation, if that makes sense.
That's a really nice way to look at it. Yeah, I like that.
Matt, you have anything to add to that?
I guess kind of echoing what I said before, I think almost the earlier, regardless of the pipeline or wherever your career trajectory like wants to be, I think getting an understanding or a handle on that stuff early can be really helpful. Like you said, kind of figuring out where your blind spots are, like the things you don't know, and where your potential weaknesses or downfalls are going to be. I think they're really useful, because you can, obviously you've got more time to start shoring those up. And that might be that you find someone that kind of, to quote Rocky, like fills your gaps. Like you find a training partner or a training community, where someone's strengths lie in your weaknesses. And that might be like a practical thing, like Brent was saying, like with the knot tying, it might be just becoming best mates with a fisherman and they can like swear you away on that stuff. Or it might be more kind of like a subtle thing where you've got someone who's got a really nasty, dark sense of humor and can kind of find humor when everything's wet and muddy and minging. Having that kind of influence early, I think, is really important, rather than waiting until selection or training or deployment and being like, oh shit, because then it's too late. It's just the same as any other physical quality that we try and develop.
Yeah, I think it's important too when you're designing your own training approach, or in our cases, when you're a coach designing a training approach, figuring out how to work around or work through the different motivations that people may have, because they're pretty different, right? And so if we work with athletes who either are soft guys or think that that's the type of shape they need to be in, that still is killing me, the whole like there's no such thing as tactical fitness. It's like saying a baseball player should train just like a football player. Anyway, when you're working with people, even in a, like, we have a very tight shot group of customer, right? Like if you're a Softlead user, you can do a bench press probably at body weight or better. You could probably power clean. You can squat with reasonable form. Like there's a barrier to entry to be a customer, which is why I think we have awesome customers. The more I work with other businesses, the more grateful I am for Softlead's customers. Like they're fucking awesome, but we still have a relatively wide berth of motivations, right? So you may have a guy whose motivation is like, hey man, I'm 60 years old and I want to stay in shape to be able to chase the grandkids on one side of the spectrum. And then on the far side of the spectrum, you've got like, hey, I'm 18 and I want to be a Ranger, Navy SEAL, whatever the hell it is. Well, why do you want to do those things? And then the needs are frankly not all that drastically different when you've got like the former operator who still wants to go run 5Ks and do swimming and blah, 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 blah. and this 18-year-old kid, but the motivations for those things are very different. The constraints that they're under are very different. And the way you get them to respond is going to be very different, right? So the guy who's like in his 60s may or may not do exactly what you say because you said to do it. And the guy that's 18 may or may not do exactly what you said because you said to do it, right? I've had the 18-year-old that goes, why the fuck am I running every day? And then I've had the 60-year-old that goes, run today, got it. Like, and vice versa. Go ahead, G.
You're reminding me of like the antithesis of that, where we see now, it's not a big industry, but we see, I'm sorry, I got to call them out, like the fucking dorks that pay 20 grand to take these fucking 3-day haze fests, you know? Can you imagine? I know there's an organization that just got hired to work with the National Guard. I'm not going to say which one of either, but I know them as one of those like haze fests, and it's supposed to be special forces selection prep.
What?
And it's like, that's not going to go well with the National Guard. That's not why they're there.
No.
Yeah. Not to derail, I think both of you, just being honest, like have finished with like elegant points. Like I'm hoping there's some fucking gold here. So I really hope that people take away what I'm hearing.
There's so much nuance to it, though, which I think is important, and it's worth discussing the nuance of, you know, people, you're going to have to meet people where they are, or you're going to have to build in the different triggers for different people. Like, it's one of the things, I have said it a lot, and I'll continue to say it, CrossFit is the best fitness methodology that's existed in modern times. And that's not because it's the most effective programming, but because it had people actually showing up and getting in the gym in ways that we've never seen before. It had community, had social capital, right? And so it got athlete compliance through the fucking roof. Like you had mom and pop garage gyms that had 100 or 200 people every day coming in and doing the same workout. You still have it to some degree. I think CrossFit's really fallen off in popularity. But like it set the stage for entire businesses to be run that way, like Five, Orange Theory, et cetera, where you have group fitness and coming in and people are like actually putting in, like it's not a fucking Zumba class, like they're actually lifting weights. And so again, I don't think that the programming and methodology there necessarily is the greatest of all time, but it is king of fitness simply for the fact that it had athlete compliance. Like I don't think any other.
No, I can't think of anything similar.
And if you think about it, they tapped into all of the different.
There's a hummingbird in my garage.
All of the different.
He's like 3. This is so fucking weird. You guys might see him. He's like right next to me. This is fucking weird.
I had one trapped in my garage a few weeks ago, and I like softly like lacrosse ball threw him out of the garage.
Okay.
But
so I wish you guys could have seen that. He was right off camera. That was cool. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't want to hit him.
Yeah, so he was in there for like hours. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna get him out. I grabbed like the broom and I got it really close to him and like touched him with it and then like meant to like quickly flick him out. And I was like, great success, like as he came off the broom and then he smacked into the truck window and fell to the ground. I was like, oh shit, I just killed the hummingbird. And I like got up and flew out of the, flew away. And I was like, all right. But what's interesting is CrossFit, if you think about it, it layered in those internal and external motivations very well. Yes. You're going to show up, and if you don't have a ton of internal motivation to push yourself, you've got like a sea of soccer moms yelling at you to go faster. And if you do have the internal motivation, like you're just there, the training's on the board, and like you're in your own little zone going, trying to beat your own PR, right? Because you remember, like they made personal records. Really, people gave a shit about it, and they would track every obscure PR on the planet. Like I did my, big toe dominant single leg overhead kettlebell press today. What the fuck it was. So for an 8-rep max, like I remember people posting like, oh, I PR'd my 8-rep max,
Oh, that's awesome. That's hilarious.
Like, what the fuck is this? But again, they were tapping into people's internal motivation there, right? You're like, okay, cool. We have obscure lift of the day. I remember that my lift was exactly 152.5 pounds or whatever the hell it was. Or you were a weirdo that went into kilos for that period of your existence. And you remembered it and you fought against that. And that was your internal motivators. And your external motivators were like, hey, the dude next to me is doing 200 pounds. I'm going to do 201, right? Or the guy next to me is like I hated so much the cheerleading of that business model, but I've got this like sea of cheerleaders waiting for this next class that are like, come on, do one more rep, right? But my point is it tapped into those motivations across the board. And that was,
I think one other thing where I think CrossFit works really well from a motivation standpoint is when you have things like I've kind of not really been following CrossFit for probably the last 7-8 years. So when I'm picturing kind of how it was when I was kind of more involved with it. But I think with things like the CrossFit Games and like the Opens and stuff like that, where that worked phenomenally was the average Joe, so person just kind of doing it recreationally, can watch someone who's quote unquote elite do exactly the same stuff that they're doing. And you get more of a grasp of like the speed or the kind of the quickness. Whereas like if you watch NBA or NFL, it's all relative because all the guys are huge. They're all like putting out a ton of power. But when you can see that like, I don't know, 100 kilo bar getting moved or that 5K run around a track, something like that, when you can see that, you get more of an idea of like just how impressive it is or just where you are compared to that.
And it's accessible. Like you can't walk into your garage and go tackle a 300-pound dude.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that where I was kind of going with that stuff is I think that's where, again, I know we always bang on about it, but like where the community piece is huge in that, like kind of a bit of a pat on the back for the Softly app, like the kind of the leaderboard, even though there's some interesting entries sometimes, being part of that is awesome because you've got guys from all walks of life and different stages of their careers. Like you said, you've got the 18-19-year-old who's just getting started, people who are kind of at the quote unquote like the peak, the apex of the profession, and people who are like transitioning out or just civvies now. And everybody's kind of it's all it's accessible and it's relative. You can see where you stack up. And I think that stuff is really cool. I think it helps kind of bring something that could be quite two-dimensional and this is what I'm doing today, 3x5, 5x3, whatever. It makes it real. It makes it kind of something you can really engage with.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is like in people's motivation, you have to give them like, when you talk about goal setting and like sports psychology, you talk to people, any goal setting needs to be incremental, right? And so you're going to take this lofty goal, hey, I want to be a billionaire. And then you're going to back plan like, okay, I got to become a millionaire to do that, right? Or I want to deadlift 800 pounds to do that. I got to deadlift 500 and you're like back planning. So what I think is interesting as we build in the motivations, like how do you keep something to aspire to without totally killing the short-term motivation, right? And so, again, I don't want to keep going on and on about CrossFit, but CrossFit was great at that because, again, every week you were like, hey, it's obscure movement of the day. We're going to find your 8-rep max or 7 or 4. You know, it like got crazy there for a while and you're going to set that. And then people immediately thought like in their head, because they just watched, I don't know, some freak show in their gym, strict press 900 pounds. They're like, oh, well, I'm pretty close to that guy on a whatever push press. And he just strict pressed 4 times what I can. I'll be able to catch him next time. Right. And so you got that like weird intrinsic motivation, which if we go back to the soft team, there were times where you like in a team, you're like, man, I just made a withdrawal from the team today. And I've got to make a deposit next time, right? So where you're like, okay, I'm, the strong guy or I'm the fast guy or whatever it is. And like, I got to do a thing that helped the team. Like I made a deposit. There were always going to be times, and it may not be in a physical manner, where you made a withdrawal. A lot of times that withdrawal was like, you're not the logistics guy, right? And so the guy that's handling all the logistics is like, he was at the office till 10 p.m. the night before, building out a load plan or whatever it was. And so you'd come in that next day and you're like, all right, I've got to make a deposit. Hey, dude, like me and these other 3 guys are going to stay late loading the truck, right? Because you came up with the load plan and how the order in which all this shit goes in. We'll button it up for you, right? And so there was this interesting social dynamic of like, am I adding or subtracting, right? And like a weird calculus that, some guys would take it too far and be like, I did that thing that one time. I don't have to do shit ever again. And you're like, that's not it. But there was a weird... Go ahead, G.
Covey talks about it from a relationship standpoint as poker chips, emotional poker chips.
That's a great way to put it, right? It happens. I mean, it happens. This doing a podcast, especially a remote podcast, but any podcast, very much you feel that dynamic where you're like, man, I've been fucking blabbering on here for like 2 minutes straight. Matt's raised his hand 6 times. I got to find the exit. But in the performance side, I think that is frankly understated, especially to folks who don't take the nuanced approach to fitness, because it's a nuanced game. When you're like, everything's a nuanced game, and it's also not, right? Like it's that like bell curve of like, where are you on the bell curve? In the beginning, you're like, nothing matters but the big 3, right? And then at the end, you're like, nothing matters at the big 3. And when you're in the meat and potatoes of the bell curve, you're like, well, you should probably do some bicep curls here and there.
Yeah.
Stretch a little, go run sometimes. But yeah.
All right. I feel any parting thoughts? Because otherwise, I feel like there's a great place to finish. All right.
Do you want to do a Monday morning? Like, if you want to start implementing some of this stuff tomorrow? Like,
yes, let's do that. Well, for me, it's more about understanding where you are in the process. Like, okay, hold on. Let me collect my thoughts real quick. A, B, C,
Got
D.
it. Can I kick it?
Yeah, you kick it, man. If you have it in your, go for it.
So there are entire entities that work on a principle-based approach to business or whatever. I think one of the things that's super important is if you can actually write out on your goals, 2, what you think your motivations are, and then 3, your principles, and then start figuring out how those actually dovetail and align, because the things that you think are important to you may quickly become not important to you, and the things that you didn't actually give enough credit to start to become really important. And I would say if you do that over like time, let's say a 6-month period, you'll start to actually get like a really tight shop group of, when you write those 3 things out, shit, that's actually what my motivations are.
Great job. Okay. So we're going to finish up. I think that's great, man. I think that's a great place to finish.
Okay.
But you sound disappointed.
I was a little disappointed. Usually you guys are way better at this shit than I am. But I was like, did I even answer Matt's question or thought? I think I did.
Matt, did you have any action items?
No, I think that,
Yeah, man. No, that's a great, those are
great.
Yeah. Be brilliant in the basics. Be accountable for yourself. I think that's the message here. And then the other thing too, it is worth revisiting that every now and then, right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
We've all pointed out that these things will shift over time. Your priorities will shift. So guys, that's going to wrap for us today. I hope you took as much as I did out of this conversation. I'm really enjoying the time talking about all this stuff, human performance with Brent and Matt, and I hope you are too. So we look forward to the next one.